The story begins in a quiet room filled with metal tools, wooden tables, and the low smell of warm dust on old machines. A single lamp glows above a radio set taken from the battlefield. Outside, distant engines rumble like a reminder that time is moving fast. But here in this room, time seems frozen. A group of German engineers stand around the table, their faces tense, their eyes fixed on the small box in front of them. It is an American radio, captured only days earlier. At first glance, it looks simple, almost ordinary. But the men studying it know that this device holds a secret. A secret that might change the direction of the war, and perhaps even the future they once believed belonged to them. One of the engineers slowly removes the radio's casing. A soft click echoes in the room. And in that moment something shifts. The air changes. The world grows quiet. Inside the radio they see parts arranged in ways they have never seen before. Small pieces. Clean connections. A strange sense of order and confidence in every joint and wire. It almost looks like the work of a different time. A future time. The men lean closer, not speaking. Their eyes widen. Their breath becomes shallow. What they see does not make sense, yet it feels impossible to deny. For years, Germany believed its engineering was unmatched. For years they believed they were ahead. But here, hidden inside a small American radio, is the truth. Their advantage may have already slipped away. As the engineers study the circuits, they whisper to each other in low voices. Some sound confused. Some sound worried. One man runs his fingers gently along the inner frame and shakes his head slowly. This should not exist yet, he murmurs. Another responds, not for at least 10 years. A cold silence follows. They all understand the meaning behind those words. The United States is not behind. It is ahead. Far ahead. And the world they thought they understood suddenly feels different, heavier, and more frightening. Perhaps this is where the real story begins. Not with a battle. Not with a weapon. But with a discovery, quiet, unexpected, and deeply unsettling. A discovery that shows how the future does not always arrive with noise or fire. Sometimes, it arrives in a small metal box, waiting quietly on a wooden table, ready to tell the truth. And now we go back. Back to the world that made this moment possible. A world shaped by machines, ideas, and two nations racing toward a tomorrow neither fully understood. The early 20th century was a time of great change. Across the world, new inventions were rewriting life itself. Radios carried voices across oceans. Factories grew louder. Cities rose higher. And the battlefield, once ruled by horses and letters, now shifted to electricity, signals, and speed. Communication became a weapon of its own, fast, invisible, and powerful. On every front, armies learned that the side that could speak fastest, clearest, and most reliably often gained the upper hand. Germany had long prided itself on engineering. Their machines were precise. Their scientists respected. Their factories disciplined and efficient. But the United States was changing in a different way. It was becoming a place where ideas moved quickly, where businesses grew fast, where risk was often rewarded instead of feared. It was a country built on open experimentation, where failure was not shameful but useful. And this difference, this cultural difference, would quietly shape the future of radio technology. In the years leading up to the war, American companies focused on mass production. They used new materials, new designs, and new methods to make their radios stable, strong, and easy to build in huge numbers. Their factories ran day and night. Their workers learned to adjust and improve without waiting for slow approvals. Innovation became a habit, not a rare moment. And somewhere inside that world of machines and ideas, American engineers created something surprising. Radios smaller, cleaner, lighter, and more advanced than anything Germany had expected. Now, imagine standing in that quiet German room again. Imagine the tension, the discomfort, the feeling of something slipping away. For the engineers inspecting the American radio, this was not just a machine. It was a message that said, the race has changed, and you may no longer be in the lead. They study the wiring. They study the tubes. They study the way each part fits so cleanly into the next. They see choices that no one in Germany had considered. They see methods that feel 10 years ahead, maybe more. Some of the men try to understand how such technology came to be. Others try to deny what they see. But the truth is right there, resting in their hands. Germany had expected strength from its rivals. But they had not expected this. They had not expected to look into the heart of an American radio and see the future staring back at them. Outside the room, the world continues to move. Orders are given. Soldiers march. Strategies change. But inside, each engineer feels something sinking inside him. A slow, heavy realization. If the Americans have this now, what will they have next year? Or the year after that? How far ahead are they already? The answer echoes silently through the room. Too far. Perhaps even too far to catch. This was not just a moment of discovery. It was a moment of awakening. A moment when they understood that the future had already begun without them. And they were standing in its shadow. And so the story widens. It stretches outward across continents and factories, laboratories and battlefields. It touches the hands of workers, the minds of scientists, the hopes of nations trying to find their place in a fast-moving world. The inspection of the radio was only one moment, but it revealed something deeper, something larger, something that shaped the outcome of the war in ways many would never fully see. But to understand how this happened, to understand why one nation moved forward while another struggled to keep up, we must go further back. Into the workshops, into the factories, into the choices made long before the discovery. Choices that created not only machines but mindsets. Not only radios but futures. The story continues here with the roads that led to that quiet room, that open radio, and that sudden, painful truth. The roads that led to that quiet room begin many years earlier, far from the battlefield and far from the pressure of war. They begin in workshops filled with imagination, in classrooms where young minds shaped new ideas, in factories where metal and skill came together to form the tools of a changing world. To understand why that small American radio felt like a doorway into the future, we must first understand the world that built it. In the early 1900s, radio was still a mystery to most people. Invisible waves traveled through the air, carrying voices that could cross mountains, oceans, and borders. It felt almost magical, yet it was real. Scientists from many nations worked to improve this strange new technology. Germany had brilliant thinkers and strong universities. The United States had growing industries and bold inventors. At first, both countries seemed to stand on equal ground, and many believed they would grow together in this new field. But life rarely moves in straight lines. As the decades passed, the paths of the two nations slowly separated. Germany focused on precision, on building machines that were strong, complex, and finely crafted. Their engineers valued perfection. They believed that a machine should be designed from the inside out, with every detail measured, polished, and refined. It was a culture shaped by discipline and pride, a belief that the best ideas came from careful planning. In the United States, things developed differently. Factories grew quickly, sometimes faster than ideas could be tested. Yet this speed created a new kind of progress. American companies experimented freely. They tried new materials, new shapes, new methods. If something failed, they simply tried again. They believed in open thinking, shared knowledge, and working together across fields. Electric companies worked with manufacturers. Inventors worked with business owners. Students worked with experienced engineers. This mix of people and ideas formed a powerful engine for innovation. And in the background of all this, the world was changing. Airplanes crossed the sky. Ships traveled vast distances. Armies began to use radios for communication. Every year, the need for fast, clear signals grew. And with that need, the pressure to innovate grew as well. By the time the 1930s arrived, the United States had developed new ways to build electronic parts quickly and efficiently. They created smaller components that used less power. They built machines that could be produced in large numbers without losing quality. American radios became lighter, stronger, and easier to use. They were not perfect, but they were improving at a remarkable pace. Meanwhile, German engineers were still relying on designs that required careful assembly and high levels of craftsmanship. Their radios worked well, but they were often heavier, larger, and harder to produce in big numbers. Germany continued to seek perfection while America learned to seek progress. And in technology, progress often wins the race. As the world moved toward conflict, the differences between the two nations became even clearer. Factories in the United States grew louder and busier. Thousands of workers learned to build complex machines with speed and accuracy. Materials were tested and replaced. Designs improved month after month. Innovation became a part of daily life. What once took years could now be done in weeks. Germany, on the other hand, faced growing pressure. Their resources were limited. Their factories were stretched. Their engineers tried to keep up, but the world around them was changing too quickly. The strong foundation they once relied on now felt heavy, slow, and difficult to adjust. And so the roads continued to separate. One path marked by rapid change, the other by careful tradition. Perhaps no one realized how different these roads were until that quiet day, when a small American radio was placed on a German table. The men who studied it were not just looking at wires and circuits. They were looking at the result of decades of choices. Choices made in workshops, in classrooms, in meetings, and in factories. Choices that shaped two nations in different ways. The radio was not simply more advanced. It was built in a different spirit. A spirit of openness, speed, and bold imagination. German engineers saw that clearly, even if they wished they did not. As they examined each part, they understood that America had embraced the future long before the war forced anyone else to catch up. For Germany, this realization was more than surprising. It was painful. It meant that they were facing not just an enemy, but a system of thinking they had not expected. A system that moved quickly, adapted constantly, and believed the future belonged to those who dared to build it early. And now, as we move deeper into the story, we begin to see how this single discovery, this moment of shock inside a quiet room, was only part of something much larger. It was not just about radios. It was about innovation, culture, and the power of change. It was about a future that had already arrived, silently and confidently, while others still believed they had time. The deeper the engineers looked into the American radio, the more questions formed in their minds. Why were the parts arranged so neatly? How were the components made so small? Why did the circuit seem to work with such calm, steady confidence, even under battlefield conditions? Nothing inside the device felt rushed. Nothing felt experimental. It felt complete, polished, ready for mass use. And that was perhaps the most unsettling part of all. For years, Germany believed it understood the limits of radio technology. They believed they knew what was possible, what was practical, and what was still far in the future. But now, inside this small metal box, they saw proof that another nation had quietly stepped beyond those limits. And they had done it not through magic or luck, but through a different way of thinking. Outside the laboratory, the world continued to shift. Armies moved. Plans changed. Battles formed and faded across maps. But inside the minds of these engineers, the real conflict had just begun. It was not a fight between countries. It was a fight between old beliefs and new realities. Germany's engineering culture had always valued perfection. Machines were built like works of art, strong, exact, and carefully crafted. But perfection takes time. Perfection requires resources. Perfection depends on control. And in a fast-changing world, those strengths can slowly become weaknesses. The United States, on the other hand, embraced speed. They built machines that were good enough, then improved them again and again. They believed that progress was not a final product, but a continuous motion. Mistakes were not failures, they were steps forward. And this difference, this simple, powerful difference, had changed everything. Factories in America had become places where ideas could move quickly. Workers learned faster. Machines were redesigned more often. Engineers from different fields met, shared ideas, and built new technologies together. A radio was not just a machine, it was part of a larger ecosystem of innovation, supported by open information, shared research, and rapid testing. German engineers now saw the results of that system in front of them. They saw vacuum tubes arranged with unusual precision. They saw circuits designed to handle stress without breaking. They saw materials that resisted heat better than their own. They saw a device built not for careful, limited use, but for the rough, unpredictable reality of war. One engineer touched a small component inside the radio and whispered, "How did they make it so small?" Another pointed to a coil and asked, Why have we not made this ourselves? A third simply stared, trying to understand how this machine felt both simple and advanced at the same time. The truth was becoming clear. America had not just built a better radio. They had built a better system for creating radios. And that system was already years ahead. Perhaps the most painful moment came when one of the engineers realized that even if Germany copied the radio exactly, every wire, every tube, every bolt, they still would not match the American advantage. Why? Because copying is slow. Copying is reactive. And by the time the copy is ready, the original creator has already moved ahead again. The future does not wait. Innovation does not pause. And now Germany understood that they were running a race on a track they had entered too late. But this story is not only about machines. It is about people. It is about the workers who spent long nights in American factories, building radios with steady hands. It is about scientists who shared their discoveries instead of hiding them. It is about leaders who believed that progress should be fast, open, and constant. And it is also about the German engineers who stood in that quiet room, realizing for the first time that they were not only behind, they were behind in a way they could not easily recover from. Imagine what they felt. Not fear alone. Not shock alone. But something deeper. Something heavier. A sense of time slipping away. A sense that the world had already changed and they were just now seeing it. One of them closed the radio slowly, almost gently, as if he were closing a door to a future he wished he had known earlier. Another wrote notes in a small book, though he knew the notes could not change what had been discovered. A third walked to the window and stared outside, wondering how many other surprises the world now held. If technology is a map of the future, then this radio was a map that Germany had never seen before. And the path it revealed led far ahead, further than they had expected, further than they had prepared for. But the story does not end in that room. It moves outward into the world of factories and soldiers, scientists and politicians. It stretches across oceans and across minds. For the discovery of the American radio did not just reveal a technical gap. It revealed a cultural one. And culture, unlike machines, cannot be rebuilt quickly. As we continue deeper into the story, we begin to understand the true meaning of this moment. It was not simply the inspection of a device. It was the unveiling of a truth that would shape decisions, change strategies, and echo through history. The engineers had opened a radio. And inside it they found the future. The future they found inside that radio did not stay locked in the laboratory. It began to spread through conversations, reports, and quiet discussions behind closed doors. Engineers spoke to officers. Officers spoke to leaders. And slowly a picture began to form, one that many did not want to see. A picture of a world where speed, adaptability, and mass production mattered more than slow perfection. A world shaped not only by brilliant minds, but by entire systems working together. A world that rewarded those who learned to move quickly. But to understand how this shaped the larger story, we must step back once again and look carefully at the roots of American progress. Because the strength of the United States did not appear suddenly. It grew from habits, ideas, and choices made over many years. In American cities, factories stretched across wide blocks, filled with long rows of machines powered by electricity. The sound of metal striking metal filled the air. Sparks danced. Workers moved in steady rhythm, trained to perform tasks with both speed and precision. They were not building just one radio at a time, they were building hundreds, sometimes thousands in a single week. Each machine that rolled off the line carried improvements learned from the one before it. This rapid production was unusual in the world at that time. It allowed American companies to create parts faster than their rivals, test them sooner, and update designs more often. Mistakes were not disasters, they were lessons. And lessons were used immediately, not saved for later. Inside research labs, the atmosphere was even more exciting. Engineers experimented with new types of vacuum tubes, smaller and more reliable than older designs. They discovered ways to make circuits that resisted heat and pressure. They created metals and coatings that lasted longer, even in harsh environments. Some breakthroughs happened by accident. Others came from long nights of study. But all were driven by a shared belief. The future would belong to those who worked fearlessly toward it. American universities also played an important role. Students studied physics, chemistry, radio science, and engineering. They learned not just theories but real applications. Professors encouraged them to try new ideas, even risky ones. Young people grew up believing that innovation was within reach, that they could shape the world with their own hands. Back in Germany, these cultural differences were not always easy to see. The nation had strong schools, talented thinkers, and a proud history of engineering. But their system moved more slowly. New ideas often passed through many levels of review. Decisions required approval from multiple authorities. Precision was valued so highly that even small changes took time. And during war, time was the one thing no one could spare. This difference in speed became a turning point. It is often said that history is not only shaped by intelligence but by timing. The American radio represented not just a clever design, it represented years of small improvements, thousands of tests, countless refinements. It represented a nation that had embraced the constant motion of progress. And Germany was now realizing how hard it was to catch up when the other side had been running for so long. As the engineers continued their study, they began to compare the American design with their own radios. They noticed how heavy their devices were, how many separate pieces needed careful assembly. They saw how one broken part could disable the whole machine. They recognized how complex repairs could be on the battlefield. And now, with the American radio in front of them, they saw how simple, strong, and efficient a different approach could be. The wires in the American radio were arranged neatly, almost elegantly. The tubes were smaller, using less power and producing less heat. The circuits were designed with clear pathways that reduced the chances of failure. It was a design meant for both the workshop and the battlefield, a combination that Germany had not mastered. Some of the German engineers felt admiration. Others felt frustration. A few felt fear. Not fear of the enemy, but fear of falling behind in a world where falling behind could mean losing everything. One of them, after studying the radio for hours, finally said quietly, "This is not just a radio. This is a sign." Another nodded. A sign that they built the future while we were still perfecting the past. Outside the room, the weather was changing. The sky grew darker. Rain began to fall, tapping softly on windows and roofs. It was a quiet reminder that the world rarely gives warnings before it changes. Progress moves silently, just like the signals flowing through radio waves, unseen but powerful. By now, word of the discovery had reached higher levels. Reports were written. Some were read with disbelief. Others were read with concern. A few were set aside as if ignoring the truth might make it less real. But truth does not fade. Truth waits. Inside the American radio was a lesson. A difficult one. A painful one. But a necessary one. The lesson was this: the future rewards those who prepare for it early, and punishes those who wait until it arrives. Germany now saw that the United States had prepared long before the world expected such preparation to matter. Factories, research labs, universities, businesses, all had moved together even without realizing it toward a shared goal: stronger, better, faster technology. And now the results were here, in the hands of engineers who wished deeply that they had seen it coming sooner. As we move forward in this story, we begin to explore how this discovery influenced more than just machines. It touched the lives of soldiers, commanders, and civilians. It changed how strategies were planned and how communication was used. It shaped the path of a conflict that would affect the entire world. The radio was small. The truth inside it was not. The truth inside that radio did not stay contained for long. It spread through the minds of Germany's engineering teams like a quiet storm. Some felt motivated, ready to push harder. Others felt discouraged, knowing how far behind they truly were. But all of them understood that this discovery could not be ignored. It marked a turning point, perhaps small to the outside world, but enormous to those who saw its meaning. Soon, reports began to reach the higher offices of the military. The language in these reports was technical but urgent. Engineers described miniature components they had never seen before. They explained how the American circuits were designed for stability under stress. They pointed out that the materials used were unusual, more advanced than their own. The message was clear. America's radio technology was not only different, it was better. For officers responsible for communication, this was alarming. Clear communication was one of the most important parts of any military operation. Messages had to travel fast. Orders had to be understood. Units had to stay connected across long distances. A reliable radio could save lives. A weak one could cost them. Germany had believed their radios were strong. And by many standards they were. But strength is not the same as progress. Strength can hold for a while, but progress moves forward constantly. Germany now saw that their machines, though solid, belonged to an earlier chapter, while America was already writing the next one. This realization forced many leaders to ask new questions. How had the Americans advanced so far so quietly? Had they misunderstood America's capabilities? Had their own expectations blinded them to reality? It is often said that nations do not lose because they are weak. They lose because they misunderstand strength, both their own and their enemies. As commanders read through the engineers' findings, some felt disbelief. Others felt frustration. A few felt admiration for the enemy they faced. But all of them felt something deeper, an uneasy sense that time was working against them. And time, once lost, cannot be reclaimed. While these conversations took place in meeting rooms and offices, life continued on the battlefield. Soldiers carried their radios across muddy fields, through forests, over frozen ground. They relied on these devices to call for support, to warn of danger, to stay connected with those leading them. And every time a signal faded or struggled, the impact was real. Meanwhile, American forces used radios that were lighter, more stable, and more resistant to weather and shock. Their messages traveled more clearly. Their units stayed more organized. Their strategies unfolded with fewer delays. Small advantages like this may not seem dramatic, but in war the smallest edge can shape the largest outcome. Back in Germany, the engineers continued their examinations. They opened more radios. They studied each part. They took notes. They fought against time, trying to understand how to close a gap that had taken years to create. It was like trying to catch a fast-moving train after standing still for too long. In their discussions, one idea began to appear again and again: mass production. American factories had learned to produce large numbers of radios with consistent quality. This was not common in Europe. Many German radios required careful individual assembly. Skilled hands had to shape and place each part. This made the machines impressive, but it also made them slow and expensive to produce. The American system was different. It relied on teamwork, shared knowledge, and standardization. Parts were interchangeable. Designs were simplified without losing effectiveness. Work could be done quickly by many people rather than slowly by a few experts. This meant that when improvements were discovered, they could be added immediately and scaled across large production lines. This was the true power behind the small radio on the German table. It was not just a device. It was a symbol of an entire system working together. The German engineers knew that copying the radio alone would not be enough. They would also need to change their entire approach to building technology. But changing a system is harder than changing a machine. Systems are built on traditions, habits, and beliefs. And in a nation already strained by war, change came neither easily nor quickly. Still, the engineers tried. They drew new designs. They proposed new methods. They asked for new materials. But factories were already under pressure. Raw resources were limited. Skilled workers were stretched thin. Even with determination, progress moved slowly. And with every day that passed, the shadow of American progress grew longer. As the discovery spread further, German scientists in other fields began examining American equipment from different areas: radar, navigation tools, communication systems. And again they found surprises. Again they found advances. And again they realized they had underestimated their opponent. There comes a moment in every story when the truth can no longer be denied. For Germany, this moment arrived quietly, like the soft click of a radio turning on. It was a realization that their future had changed, not because of a single event, but because of years of choices made by both nations. Germany had relied on perfection. America had relied on progress. And in a fast-changing world, progress had proven stronger. These discoveries began shaping new strategies, new decisions, and new understandings about the war and the world beyond it. Technology was not just a tool, it was a direction, a path, a sign of where the future would go. But while engineers and commanders studied machines, there were also human stories unfolding, stories of the people who built, repaired, and relied on these radios every day. Their experiences bring us closer to the emotional heart of this documentary, where technology meets human lives. And this is where the story now turns. From the machines, to the people who lived beside them. The people who lived beside these machines often understood their importance in ways numbers and reports could never fully capture. For soldiers, a radio was more than a device. It was a lifeline. It was the thread that connected them to safety, to leadership, and to hope. A clear message could guide them out of danger. A broken signal could leave them alone in silence. In the middle of a battlefield, sound becomes a kind of truth, and silence becomes a threat. German soldiers carried heavy radio units across rough terrain. Mud clung to their boots. Rain soaked their uniforms. Cold winds cut through layers of cloth. Every step felt harder with the weight of equipment on their backs. When they set up their radios, they often had to handle delicate parts with frozen fingers. They turned dials slowly, trying to hold the signal steady. Sometimes the device would work perfectly. Other times, the sound would crackle, fade, or disappear entirely. And in those moments, fear settled into their hearts. They did not always know why the radios failed. They only knew the consequences. Messages delayed by minutes could change the outcome of an entire operation. A lost connection could cause confusion in the field. Mistakes grew larger with distance. And in war, every second mattered. Meanwhile, across the ocean, American soldiers experienced something different. Their radios were smaller and easier to carry. They were built with sturdy cases that resisted weather and shock. When an American soldier pressed the switch and spoke, the voice often traveled clearly. When he listened, he usually heard a steady response. This reliability created confidence. It allowed units to move faster. It reduced the fear of being cut off from the world. One American soldier later wrote in a letter, "The radio felt like a friend. It was always there when we needed it." Another described it as the voice that kept us alive. These words may seem simple, but in war, simple truths often carry the greatest weight. On the German side, radio operators were talented, disciplined, and brave. They worked under intense pressure, often in dangerous positions. They knew how important their role was. They did everything they could to keep communication flowing. Yet many of them felt the limits of their equipment. They fought not just the enemy but also the challenges of older technology. Some radio operators tried to modify their devices in the field. They adjusted wiring. They experimented with new antennas. They created small repairs with whatever tools they carried. Their efforts showed the strength of human determination. But determination has limits when the tools themselves cannot match the moment. Back in Germany, factory workers began hearing rumors about the American radios. Many did not see the devices themselves, but they heard whispers, smaller, stronger, faster. Some workers felt disbelief. Others felt fear. Many simply felt tired, knowing how hard they worked already and realizing that more would be asked of them. In American factories, workers sometimes felt the opposite. They took pride in seeing their radios reach soldiers. They believed their work made a difference. Some factories placed large boards on the wall, showing how many units were produced each day. Each number represented lives protected. Each completed machine was a silent promise sent across the world. The emotional difference between the two nations grew as well. American workers felt they were building the future. German workers felt they were fighting against time. Even the families of soldiers felt the impact of these radios. When American families received letters from their loved ones, many messages spoke of strong communication and organized movement. German families received letters too, but some contained stories of silence. Moments where help came too late or messages never arrived. This is the part of history that is rarely told. Not the battles, not the strategies, but the quiet struggles behind the scenes. A soldier waiting in the cold for a signal that never comes. A radio operator praying that his equipment will hold together for one more hour. A family far away hoping that the next letter brings better news. Technology may shape wars, but human lives give those technologies meaning. As the months passed, Germany tried to improve their communication systems. Engineers worked long hours. New designs were tested. But the pressure of war left little time for experimentation. What America had built slowly over many years, Germany now tried to achieve in a fraction of that time. Some improvements appeared. Some new devices worked well. But the gap remained. Why? Because progress is not only about intelligence. It is about culture. It is about collaboration. It is about a system that allows ideas to move quickly and grow freely. And that system could not be built overnight. Meanwhile, American scientists continued to develop even more advanced communication tools. New materials were designed. New circuit shapes were tested. New ideas spread through laboratories, universities, and factories. The engine of innovation kept turning faster and faster. And as Germany studied the captured radios more deeply, they realized something unsettling. America might already be working on the next step forward. The device in their hands could already be outdated in American labs. This thought created a sense of urgency, a sense of fear, a sense that no matter how hard they worked, they were chasing a moving target. But the greatest emotional impact came not from the engineers, not from the officers, but from the young soldiers who depended on these radios every day. They understood better than anyone how communication shaped survival. They felt it in their bones, in their breath, in their beating hearts. A young German operator recalled a night when he tried to call for help as enemy forces moved closer. The rain poured heavily. The wind howled. He turned the radio knobs over and over, but the signal faded again and again. He whispered, "Please, please work." By the time a message finally reached him, it was too late to change the situation. Across the world, an American operator described a similar night. Heavy rain. Strong winds. But when he pressed the switch, the voice on the other end came through clearly. Reinforcements arrived. His unit survived. One strong signal changed everything. This is not a story about heroes or villains. It is a story about systems. About preparation. About understanding that the future belongs to those who build it early. And the people on both sides lived through the results of choices made long before they ever held a radio in their hands. And now the story shifts again. From the emotional struggles of individuals to the larger reflections that grew from this discovery. Reflections that touched leaders, shaped decisions, and left lessons that continue even today. As the war continued, the meaning of the captured American radio grew deeper inside the minds of German leaders, scientists, and soldiers. It was no longer just a surprising discovery. It became a symbol, a reminder of how quickly the world could change and how dangerous it was to stand still while others moved forward. It also became a quiet teacher, offering lessons that stretched far beyond the battlefield. One of the first reflections that emerged was about the nature of innovation itself. Germany had always believed that the best inventions came from careful planning and perfect execution. They believed that a well-crafted machine, even if it took longer to build, would always outperform anything produced quickly. But now the world was showing a different truth. Sometimes progress grows not from perfection but from flexibility. Not from tight control but from freedom. Not from slow precision but from rapid learning. The United States had shown that a culture willing to experiment, adapt, and improve was often stronger than a culture focused on avoiding mistakes. American factories changed designs weekly if needed. German factories sometimes took months to approve a single modification. American workers learned to adjust their methods on the spot. German workers followed strict patterns that rarely shifted. And when the world entered a fast-moving conflict, speed outperformed perfection. This realization affected many German thinkers deeply. Some wished their system had been more open to new ideas earlier. Some felt frustrated, knowing they had the intelligence but not the freedom to innovate quickly. Some felt sadness, recognizing how many opportunities had been missed simply because the culture around them valued caution more than change. Another reflection centered around collaboration. In the United States, companies, universities, and research groups worked closely together. Knowledge flowed between them. When one team discovered something new, others built upon it immediately. Progress happened in layers, growing broader and stronger with each shared idea. Germany, however, often kept knowledge separate. Companies guarded their secrets. Research groups worked alone. Military departments sometimes withheld information even from their own engineers, believing secrecy was more important than collaboration. But secrecy slows growth. Isolation weakens understanding. And when Germany finally opened that American radio, they saw what true collaboration could achieve. A device built from the combined strength of many fields: engineering, physics, materials science, and manufacturing. A device that reflected not just one idea, but thousands of ideas working together. Perhaps one of the strongest reflections came from understanding how progress shapes power. A nation's strength is not only measured by the size of its army or the number of its machines. It is also measured by how quickly it can adapt, improve, and respond to change. America's ability to build radios in large numbers was not simply an industrial achievement. It was a signal, a sign that the country could shift, grow, and develop faster than many predicted. German leaders began to see this clearly. Some were troubled. Others were inspired. But all understood that the world was entering a new era, one in which technological progress would become one of the greatest strengths a nation could possess. Not just for war but for everything: communication, transportation, science, medicine, and daily life. And so, the captured radio became more than a story about two nations. It became a reflection on humanity's relationship with the future. It raised questions that still matter today. What happens when a society values tradition over innovation? What happens when fear of failure slows progress? What happens when leaders underestimate the importance of research and education? What happens when people do not see how quickly the world is changing? The German engineers felt these questions deeply. In their hearts, many understood that the radio represented a lesson they had learned too late. They knew that even if they worked tirelessly to catch up, the gap would remain. Not because they lacked intelligence or skill, but because the systems around them were not built for rapid growth. And yet, even in this difficult realization, there was also a sense of hope. Some engineers believed that this discovery could inspire change. They believed that after the war Germany could rebuild with a new mindset, one that embraced innovation instead of fearing it, one that encouraged ideas instead of restricting them, one that saw the value of learning from others, even from rivals. This hope was quiet but real. It lived in the conversations between scientists. It showed in the notes written late at night in crowded labs. It echoed in the thoughts of young engineers who dreamed of a better future. Even during conflict, the human desire to improve, to build something meaningful, remained strong. But there was also reflection on a deeper, more personal level. The German engineers began to think about the choices individuals make in their own lives. How often do people avoid new ideas because they fear change? How often do they stay with old habits even when the world demands something new? How often do they wait for the future instead of building it? Standing in front of that open radio, some of them realized that this lesson applied not only to nations but to themselves. They wondered how many opportunities they had missed because they wanted things to stay familiar. They wondered how many breakthroughs they might have found if they had allowed themselves to explore more freely. These were quiet thoughts, unspoken but powerful. The radio made them reflect on time as well. Time is the one resource that cannot be rebuilt, cannot be replaced, cannot be regained once lost. Germany had lost time by moving too slowly, and now they were living through the consequences of that loss. Time had moved forward without them, and the future had arrived before they were ready. This realization carried a kind of sadness but also a kind of clarity. It is a reminder that the future does not appear suddenly. It grows slowly, through thousands of choices made every day. And those who pay attention to those choices are the ones who shape what comes next. And now, as the reflections deepen, we approach the final understanding of this story, the understanding that technology is never just metal and wires. It is the reflection of human thought, human culture, and human vision. The American radio was not simply a machine ahead of its time. It was a symbol of what happens when a society moves boldly toward tomorrow. In the final stretch of this story, we return to that quiet German room, the place where everything changed. The radio sits on the table once more, its outer casing removed, its inner parts exposed like the open pages of a book. The engineers who first studied it now understand much more than they did on that day. They understand that they were not simply looking at a machine. They were looking at a message from the future. The soft glow of the desk lamp still falls across the metal pieces, but now the room feels different. It no longer holds only shock or confusion. It holds a sense of acceptance, a sense of humility, and a deeper sense of understanding. The discovery that once frightened them has now become a guide, a reminder of how the world truly works and how quickly it can move. The engineers know that they cannot change the past. They cannot rebuild the years they lost or undo the choices that slowed their progress. But they can learn. They can look at this moment not as a defeat but as a lesson that future generations might carry with them. And as the war continues outside, as the world shakes and shifts, the meaning of the radio grows even clearer. The future does not wait for anyone. It does not slow down. It does not apologize for arriving early. It moves forward at the speed of ideas, at the speed of imagination, at the speed of those who dare to build tomorrow even before the world expects it. The American radio showed what happens when a nation invests in creativity, in teamwork, in curiosity. It showed what happens when people are encouraged to try, to fail, to improve, and to try again. It showed that innovation is not born in a single moment, but in many small steps taken by countless hands over many years. Germany's engineers saw this truth too late, but the truth remained just as powerful. It revealed a principle that reaches far beyond war and technology, a principle that touches education, business, science, and everyday life. Progress belongs to those who prepare for it. Strength belongs to those who adapt. And the future belongs to those who are willing to embrace change. The captured radio became a symbol of all these things. A symbol of what the world could become when people work together toward a shared vision. A symbol of how progress can surprise those who underestimate it. A symbol of how important it is to remain open to new ideas, even when old ideas feel comfortable. In the years after the war, Germany rebuilt itself with a new understanding of innovation. The painful lessons learned from moments like the radio inspection helped shape a more open, collaborative, and forward-looking culture. America continued to develop new technologies, moving deeper into the age of electronics, eventually stepping into the era of computers, satellites, and global communication. But the lesson carried by the radio did not belong to any one nation. It belonged to the world. It belonged to anyone who has ever faced the challenge of falling behind. It belonged to every person who has ever wondered how to keep up in a world that moves faster every year. And if we listen carefully, the message inside that small metal box still speaks today. It tells us to stay curious, to stay open, to stay willing to learn. It tells us that progress does not come only from intelligence but from courage. The courage to try something new. The courage to adapt. The courage to look at the world honestly and say, we must do better. When the engineers finally closed the casing of the American radio and placed it back on the table, they did so with a different feeling than when they opened it. They no longer saw it as a threat. They saw it as a teacher. And teachers, even unexpected ones, shape the world more than we realize. As they turned off the lamp and left the room, the shadow stretched across the table, resting gently on the machine that had revealed so much. Outside the night was calm. A cold wind brushed across the ground. Somewhere in the distance, faint signals moved through the air, messages traveling across fields and forests, carrying orders, warnings, hopes, and fears. Invisible waves, connecting people in ways they could not always see. Invisible waves shaping events both big and small. Invisible waves carrying the future across the sky. And as we step back from this story, the message becomes clear. The future is always being built, quietly, steadily, by those who dare to imagine it. And sometimes the greatest discoveries are not found on battlefields, but inside small, silent machines waiting to be opened. This is the meaning of the moment when Germany inspected an American radio, and realized their future had already arrived too late. A soft truth, a hard lesson, and a reminder for all of us that the world moves forward whether we are ready or not. The story ends here, but its lesson continues, carried through the air like a signal that never fades.